Today on Art Matters with Mr. Morris, we're going to draw an animal using shapes.
Art Matters with Mr. Morris. Yeah.
Likely, you've all seen one of these horrible books, these I love to draw, I can draw books, where they start with step one, step two, step three, and then all of a sudden, at some point, you're supposed to have this completely finished drawing. And the question is how? Because they're skipping some parts. So like, look, I'm looking at the seahorse and I can see circle, okay, we add some stuff, we do some erasing, okay. But then we get to these last two and I'm like, this doesn't make any sense at all. How do we go from two circles to this completely finished picture of a seahorse? There are steps missing from these books. Now don't get me wrong, there's some good elements of these books, but my main issue is, okay, like we have the Shetland pony, and that's cool, but like it isn't teaching you how to draw every Shetland pony, it's teaching you how to draw that one Shetland pony from that one angle. So look at these two puppies, for instance. First off, I don't know why they put in two, but they're doing a really good idea here of doing face gridding like you would with a person. But they have this super simplified face, and then all of a sudden, boom, we have a finished dog. They never went into how to do the patterns. They never went into any of the details on how to actually draw what was before you. They just showed you a trick to draw that one particular thing. So today, we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about the good parts of these books, and we're going to ignore the bad parts, and I'm going to show you some different techniques. So before we get started, let's do a quick review. When we last met, we talked about the stick figure and how it's a symbol rather than a drawing. But we can use that symbol to represent a more completed drawing and make our figures more accurate. We also talked about shape figures, and shape figures are just that. They're a figure that's made out of shapes, but quite often they don't look like they have joints, and so these figures tend to look like they have noodle arms. We talked about taking our stick figure, that symbol, and adding on joints. We talked about adding elbows and knees, and then extending that with extra lines. By making the stick figure more dynamic, it becomes a stick armature, something that we can pose and something that we can have show motion. We talked about shrinking the head down just a little bit and turning it into an oval. And last, we talked about thickening up those stick figures, making them so that they are big and beefy, so they are strong stick figures. They shape armatures, and these, again, make for a much more dynamic use in our drawings. Last, we talked about upgrading our stick figures and stick armatures by showing a skull, a rib cage, a pelvis, and all of those joints. By doing this, we're really creating an artist's armature, something that can be very dynamic but also accurate, something that can show the bends and twists of a torso while still showing the motion of the arms and the legs. Whee! This isn't just limited to human forms. We can use it for any kind of animal, especially animals that have a spinal column and have those clear, distinct senses of a pelvis, a rib cage, and a skull. But there's more than one way to draw a cat, or anything for that matter. Today we're going to discuss how we can use the shapes that we see in an existing image to recreate that image. I can see a circle here and I can see a circle there. I can see basic shapes like a triangle that fits perfectly right over top of the neck and the face and the shoulders. I can see a square that can fit over top of the neck and the upper chest. I can break down the bottom into a large rectangle. I can take this entire cat and break the cat into little pieces or shapes that make up the cat. When I take those shapes and I put them all together, it forms the basic structure of our cat as a whole. Now, you'll notice that all the shapes that I picked to use filled large areas of the image of the cat. Not small ones, but big sections. I'm not worried about the little shapes yet, but once I have these big sections in, then I can concern myself with other things. As I look at the cat and I've got the large shapes all figured out, now I focus in on the smaller ones. I start looking for the shape of, for instance, around the eyes or
around where the whiskers are. I'm going to look for the shapes of the paws, and I'm going to look for the shapes of the body and the arms individually. I'm going to break the cat into smaller shapes than I did the first time. And then after I'm done doing that, I'll go through and I'll do it a third time, getting even smaller shapes and smaller details. The point of making a piece of artwork isn't to get it done all at one time. It's to do it in layers. You start with the big stuff that you can see from far away, and you work your way to the small stuff that you can only see up close. Enough of my yakking, let's get started with the assignment. Go onto your iPad and go onto Google. I want you to do an image search for an animal. It can be any animal that you want. It just has to have at least 2 legs, and you should make sure that the majority of your animal fits into the picture. Once you have your animal image found, go ahead and press on the image and hold your finger down. It's going to give you a pop-up menu where you can save the image. If you can't get that to work, take a screenshot, crop the screenshot, and then you're good to go. After you have your image saved, open it up in Photos and adjust the saturation. In other words, we're going to remove all the color and turn it into a black and white image. If you can print your photo, that works the best. But if you can't print your photo, just work from the computer screen. That being said, I've printed my photo. In this case, I printed this little puppy dog. Now, I want to show you a couple different ways that I could depict this puppy dog. Now, I know some of you are thinking, Mr. Morse, you just taught us how to do stick figures, and we could do this with the animal. But here, there's a problem, and this is why I'm showing you a different method today, because the stick figure or armature method works very well, but not all the time. Let me show you what I mean. We know the dog has a head, a chest, and a pelvis. So we've got a head, a chest, and a pelvis. And we know that they're kind of smushed together, right? There's the head, there's the chest, there's the pelvis. So they're kind of close together. We know the dog has hips, we know the dog has shoulders. And we can see arm comes down, elbow, arm comes over, elbow, paw comes down. And this side, we've got arm comes down, elbow, arm comes over, wrist, paw, and then foot, ankle. This does not look like a dog. This does not look like something that's going to help me to draw this. So instead of worrying about the armature, I'm going to worry about the shapes that make the dog up. The most obvious one is to trace. So I literally took this paper, put it over top, and I traced what I saw. And I was looking at it, and you can see I got some of the larger shapes, but for the most part, what I'm doing here is I'm capturing the silhouette, the outline. And that's how our brains work. We kind of think of it like this is a sheet of paper, but as soon as I put a circle on the sheet of paper, now everything that's here is a circle, and everything that's outside of that outline is not the circle. This is how our brains first start to contextualize and put together what it is that we're looking at. So when we trace something, or when we draw from the silhouette, it's essentially the same thing. We're saying this is a nose and everything outside of it isn't a nose, and this is the head and everything outside of it isn't the head. We're not leaving open shapes, we're closing those shapes, but in reality, the dog is made up of shapes, but they're very much open, they're very much flowing together. Now, thinking about the I Can Draw books, they essentially start off with a very solid foundation of look for the big shapes and copy the big shapes. So here you can see I've got the round part of the dog's head and its body, its arms. And what I did is this is again traced over top. This time, instead of me trying to trace the outline, I'm trying to trace the completed shapes that make up the dog. Now, that being said, we can take this and go a little bit further with it, which is what I'm about to show you. Again, if you can print your copy, it works a lot better because you can draw on your copy. So let me show you a couple basic quick things. Without me spending a lot of time here, you can see I clearly have a circle. And here, I clearly have, well, it's not quite a circle, but it's pretty close to it. I have a lopsided circle. And here on the dog's leg, I have this shape like this. And you can see I can break this dog into smaller shapes. I can overlap these shapes and I can simplify what I see. In fact, if I look at this back leg, it doesn't even look like a leg. It's just basically a rectangle that's sitting right there.
So I can see that the dog is made up of these shapes. Here I have basically a triangle, and here I have basically a triangle. So this is important because I like to have a student take something that I put down like this that's recognizable and tell them, hey, copy it exactly how you see it. And the student almost always goes like this. Is it exact? No. Is it roughly the same thing? Yes. I made the A the size that I did because that's the size I saw here. And I made the B in relation smaller and lowercase because that's what I saw here. And I made the C the same size as the A because that's what I saw here. And I started the D differently, but I still do the D about the same size. Our brains are trained to be able to say that this square is smaller than this square. Our brains are able to very easily say, this is an angle, I'm going to copy that angle. And yeah, you might not copy that angle exactly to the right angle. You might also make the angle a little bit more narrow, but you can then look at it and say, oh, I made this too narrow. When we're learning to make art, it's about comparing things. It's about looking at what's there and copying what's there. We know that the ABCs typically would be an A, a B, a C, and a D. We know that typically they're going to all be uniformed, and this is not uniformed, and the D is backwards. And we know that this is how it works. Our brain recognizes this, but if I tell you copy this, you're almost always going to copy it like what you see, not like how the alphabet actually is. And then the same thing goes with the angle, with the squares, anything. When we're learning to draw, the important part is this. There is no dog here. This is a bunch of ink that's on a sheet of paper that's made from a dead tree. There is no dog. The dog doesn't exist. There is no dog. But there are clear shapes. And I can copy those clear shapes. And that is what you're going to do for today's assignment. You're going to take your image and you're going to be drawing that animal, but you're going to be drawing not that animal, but the shapes that make up that animal and going smaller and smaller. Let me show you what I mean. So I did some quick shapes on here, but I can use that as a basis, but the main thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to literally trace around this a couple times. I'm letting my muscles feel what it feels like to draw that circle. And then lightly, I'm drawing that circle. The light part is the important thing here. I'm using a pen. You're probably using a pencil. But even if you're using a pencil, draw lightly. Remember, it's our prefrontal cortex. It's our brain working against us making art that makes us draw dark. Don't draw dark. Start light, always, always, always. And if this doesn't turn out exactly how you want, that's okay. Remember, this is just a piece of artwork. It's not going to be hanging up in some gallery. It's not your end-all, be-all. This doesn't represent who you are. It is simply an exercise. So treat it like an exercise. Here I'm looking for where in the circle that line starts. It starts right there. And I'm just going to come straight down through. And I'm looking at that circle, and I'm saying this circle, the head, fits in the body's circle. And I'm saying, oh, the body's circle is kind of oblonged. I'm going to be tempted to draw a foot, but I don't see a foot, so I'm not going to draw one. I'm simply drawing the shape that I see here. When I'm looking at where these shapes are, I want to look at how they are in relation to each other, just like those letters. I want to try to space things out so that it is spaced the same way as it is in my photograph. I'm not really worrying about the outline of the dog. I'm worried about the parts, the shapes that I'm seeing inside of the dog, inside of the dog's silhouette. Now I have my dog's big shapes drawn in. Does it look like a dog? No, and here's one of the dangers. You're gonna want it to look like a dog right now, but it won't. Or a cat, or whatever it is that you're drawing. You're gonna want it to look like that thing, but it's not going to yet, and that's okay. Our brain is gonna start telling us you're making a mistake, I need to erase, I need to start over. Don't listen to your brain, just keep on going. Now, I've done the big shapes. I've done the stuff of what I'd see from this dog if it was 100 yards away from me. And now I wanna say, what would I see at 50 yards away from me? So I'm gonna say this shape here, check this out. Boom. There's this rounded shape, kind of like a pear with the top cut off. So again, I'm gonna look at this and measure it. Oh, it's a little bit, if I look, it's not quite halfway. It's a little over halfway. And it comes down, and if I don't get this exact, guess what? No one is judging me for that. Don't judge yourself for that. Just keep on drawing. And I'm gonna see the shapes of the eyes, but here's the thing. There are no eyes. Again, I'm just looking for the shape. I'm not gonna try to make this look like an eye, just trying to copy the shape that I see. And I can see that there's a separation here, and oh, here I'm starting to notice that my circle that I did for the head, well, it's a little bit more complicated than I originally thought. Kind of breaks up into different planes. So I want to do those shapes. And I can start refining shapes. I can start moving things around and making it look a little bit more like the actual outline. So I am looking at the outline now, and I'm looking at how that outline plays with the shapes I've already drawn. And I'm not worrying about erasing. I'm just worried about putting in the shapes and refining the shapes. I'm drawing right over top. And as I draw over top, I can even draw in a little bit darker than I did at the beginning. And the more I look at this, the more I refine it, the more smaller and smaller details I get into. Eventually, I'll have the whole dog framed in, I'll do some shading over top of it, and I'll finish the image. That's a ways off. For right now, think of it again, big shapes to medium shapes to small shapes to itty bitty tiny little tiny shapes. Make the dog or your animal out of the shapes you see, not the dog. Don't draw the dog, draw the shapes. I don't actually see separate toes here, for instance. I see the toe pads, but these two are combined together. Draw the shape that you see, not the object that you think it is. If your animal only has two paws showing, you're only gonna draw those two paws. You're not making up stuff. I don't worry about what his back toes look like because I don't see them here.
To recap, you are going to find an image of an animal with at least 2 legs. If you can print it, that's great, but if not, that's all right too. For that image, you want to make sure that most of the animal's body should be showing in it. Next, you're going to identify the largest shapes that are in the image, and you're going to draw those. You're going to break that animal into large shapes first. And as you do this, you're going to work into smaller and smaller and smaller shapes. You're going to include all the shapes that you can find in that image. Once your animal is pretty much drawn into the picture, you want to make sure that you're shading in the image, and don't forget to put in a background. It can be the background from the photo, or you can make up your own. As always, my artists, I cannot wait to see what it is that you create. Until next time, please remember, be kind to yourself and keep on making art. I'm Mr. Morris. Have a great day.